And good morning, Utsada. Welcome to Hindu Lounge number 60. And Namaste Maya Durga.
Namaste,
Utsada,
namaste everybody.
Utsada, this is a landmark Hindu Lounge episode. It is Hindu Lounge episode number 60. And 60, is a very important number in Hindu Dharma and Hindu culture. It is the Sashti Purti, this completion of 60. It's a significant number.
That's
So
correct. And we have been at it for 63 weeks now. Uh,
63 weeks, right? We took only a couple of weeks off, and then that too was for some reason or the other, right?
yeah, on holidays, we took just three of them off. So that's amazing.
I know it shouldn't, so if nothing else, we are consistent. Also, I want to first welcome the people who have joined us. This is Hindu Lounge. Hindu Lounge is brought to you by Hindu Pact, which is the Hindu Policy Research and Advocacy Collective, an initiative of World Hindu Council of America. Hindu Lounge comes live every week at 11 o'clock Eastern. We are live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and all the other social media channels. And we talk about contemporary American Hindu issues. I am Ajay Shah. I'm the president of World Hindu Council of America, or VHPA, and with me, as every week, he is Utsav Chakrabarti. Utsavda is the executive director of Hindu Pact. Utsavda, welcome. It is a significant day today. Today is the weekend where, on 4th of July, which we celebrate the American Independence Day. Today is actually the American Independence Day, right? Today is 4th of July. So,
Today is 4th
Utsavda,
of July. Yes.
yes, and what a better way to start our show than by playing American national anthem. So that with hands on our heart, and we will show the flag, and we will play the American national anthem. Here we go. Let's see if I can have everything set up here in some way or the other. And here we are. So that the American national anthem. So that was the U.S. national anthem sung by the United States Navy Band, and it's the last. For those who don't know, the last words, the last line of the song says, "For the land of the free." And our topic today is an interesting contrast between the land of the free and the land that is ruled by the communist, that is China. So it so happens that today is this week rather is also a week when the Chinese Communist Party is celebrating its 100th anniversary. So this is a stark contrast. Here we are celebrating freedom in America, and the Chinese Communist Party is celebrating the 100th anniversary of suppressing its own people, right? And so, what a contrast. So, Utsada, what better way to talk about the Chinese Communist Party than as if we are sitting in a coffee shop in Calcutta where we have nothing else better to do but talk about communism over a cup of coffee, right? So I think you can relate to that. I know you didn't grow up in Bengal, but you've been there enough number of times to say that, let's just have a idle chit chat, sitting in a lounge, drinking coffee, and talking about communism.
Well, I used to spend 2 months in a year in Bengal every year since the
Where's
age
your
of.
coffee cup?
So I was getting there. The first thing is Bengalis rarely drink coffee. Bengalis mostly drink tea. So if you are in Kolkata and if you are discussing communism, you need to have a cup of tea like I have here in my hand. But the cup that these are American cups. The size of the cup there is a one third the size of the cup that I'm showing you here. So it's a small, tiny cup, and it has very good tea in it. And you spend 6 hours with that tiny cup of tea, problem solving all the problems of the world, except those that are in Bengal. So you basically just talk about the North Pole to the South Pole, and from you name it, Seychelles all the way around the globe to Diego Garcia, and yet you don't talk about Bengal's problems. That's how communist Bengalis who are communists used to operate, and they still do. They just have different party names now. Uh,
Hey,
yes, go on.
so that check where is this cup made? Go ahead and check it.
Uh, it is
Eh,
made in China.
And so is mine. What is so that was the other reason I said bring a cup, because no matter what cup you bring, the chances are that the cup is made in China.
That's
And
correct.
people don't realize that the cup that you're using, the monitor you're watching this show on, the webcam that we are recording this show on, many of these companies may not be Chinese. But if you look at where is it made, no matter how small the item, no matter how big the item, no matter how significant, insignificant a paper clip or a component of a drone or a drone itself, all of it is made in China. And that has given China enormous economic muscle. And it was not always like that. But in last 30 years, 20 years especially, China has arrived on the world stage. And the Communist Party of China believes that their brand of communism, unlike the brand of communism that was practiced by Soviet Union or some of the other countries in Eastern Europe, their brand of communism is the one that is ideally suited for 21st century. It is bringing people out of the dark ages of China, where China was, invaded by foreigners, Japan, for example, and ruled by Japan to some extent. So this is Chinese Communist Party thinks that they have arrived now at a world scene, challenging the American dominance to be the superpower, and they attribute their success to communism. Now, this same communism that suppresses China's own people, not even talking about people in Hong Kong or people who are Uyghurs or any of that, or Tibetans especially, but I'm talking about people who are, who have no freedom of speech. Every aspect of their life is controlled by this Communist Party, and yet they think that this ideology is ideal for the world, not because it may be ideal for the world, but because it will help them establish their version of imperialism on the rest of the world. And we have ample examples of that, starting from Sri Lanka to all the way to places in Africa. So we'll get into all of that. But let's start where it all started, with the origins of Communist Party in China. And Utsoda, take it away. I know this is a topic for which you have a special passion.
So Ajay bhai, you have to look at Chinese history to understand how China's communism emerged, and how actually the communism that China pretends now it has is it's a capitalist dictatorship. So it is the only part of communism that stays in China now in today since the 1990s is that there is no democracy, there's no elections, there's no, so it's basically a rule by a clique of leaders on the top. Uh,
And most
everything
of them are princelings, right? I mean, these are the people who are sons, and mostly sons, but some daughters of people who are the revolutionary heroes in China.
is
So it's
exact.
not like it's
So it's
meritocracy.
hereditary, yeah. So it has become, it's like a monarchy. Uh, it's a dictatorial monarchy. That is the only part of communism that is there in China. Everything else is actually capitalism. So it's a unique. You can China can call it communism. It's not actually communism anymore. Because I'll tell you the reason why. It's not because I would like to not to associate any capitalistic notions with communism, but it's because what communism actually was and how it was envisioned is very, very different from what China is doing. And that's why it is not a communist. It just says it is communist because it wants to take over the leadership of the global movement that is associated with leftism or Marxism or socialism, however you want to put it. In different parts of the world, all these terms mean different things. So if you go back into the history of Marxism, you will see that Marxism actually has very simple concept, and its concept is basically about
So that, can you hold for just a second? I don't know where the external sound is coming from. Let me, I think that might be at my end. So let me go mute.
okay.
Sorry for that brief interruption, but please proceed.
Sure. So, when communism was envisioned, it was envisioned as a way to overthrow the ruling class, and the ruling class, the class that had power, not just the leadership of the class, but the average people on the street who had power, was called the bourgeois, according to Marx and Engels. And the class that did not have the power, but were producers of anything, from farm to factory. Even most of the communist ideas came in Europe, which was industrialized. So it was not farm related in the beginning. It was mostly factory workers and their people who were being united, and they were called the proletariat. So communism was basically a manufactured, in those days may not have been as manufactured because it was real. This difference was real. There was industrial revolution going on, and new money and new productivity came into being because of the existence of machines. So it was a fight between classes, and that's how communism looked at it. And in fact, if you went and translated to Asia and how it appeared in China, China was not industrialized country. It was it's a farm based. So there, communism took a different form, and it became basically a class struggle between people who owned lands versus people who didn't own lands but worked on it. And like everywhere, any hallmark of communist revolution is violent. There is no peaceful communism. Real communism has never been peaceful. It will never be peaceful. Uh, in fact, one of the tenets is that the peaceful abolition of private property is desirable, but it will never be successful due to violent opposition from the bourgeois. And the proletariats will be finally driven to an armed revolution. That is the fundamental of how Marx envisioned communism. So there has to be an armed struggle in communism, according to the founders of communism. It can pretend to not have it for a while, but eventually it will be. And also it goes ahead to say that limitations of private property through progressive taxation, heavy inheritance tax, abolition of inheritance through collateral lines. So basically you cannot inherit anything. Irony here. China is all the Chinese communist leaders are inheritors from their parents. And forced loans. Gradual expropriation of landowners, industrialists, railroad owners, and ship owners, partly through competition by the state industry and partly through direct compensation in the form of bonds. So basically, anything, if you owned anything, then the communist has the right to take it away from you. And this is how it played out over the last 120 years around the world. If you look at every communist dictatorship that existed, it always ended up with people losing everything. And no, it was no different in China in the beginning. And actually China went through a brutal what they call as the Cultural Revolution. In fact, Mao,
And they have acknowledged that, right? I
yeah,
mean,
they have
they have
encouraged that, they
acknowledged
have
it.
apologized
They have
for it.
acknowledged it.
In fact, they are trying to make up for it. That's why I'm saying what you see
They're
in
trying
China
to make
is,
up for it.
yeah, China is actually not communism anymore. It's just
Yeah,
dictators pretending to be communists, to
yeah.
carry forward a legacy, but actually are capitalists. So, according to Mao, the Chinese revolutionary who founded communism in China, and you will hear a lot about Mao in this presentation here on. Revolutionary warfare is never confined within the bounds of military action. This is for those in America who are watching what's Antifa is doing and whatnot. This is what Mao says. Revolutionary war is never confined within the boundaries of military action because its purpose is to destroy an existing society and its institution and to replace them with a completely new structure. Any revolutionary war is a unity of which the constituent parts in varying importance are military, political, economic, social, and psychological. So basically, it aims to first militarily, then politically, then economically and socially, and then individually in your head, impact you and change you forever. That's the goal of ideal Marxist communist revolutionary war, according to Mao, the founder of Chinese communism. So, I say these things because these things, even though communism is dead in most parts of the world, and in China is not really communism, but as I said, something else, it still manages to cause impact on current generations of people. You will see everywhere in the world, the ideas still find themselves in different forms and expressing themselves against certain people. And that is why it is relevant. And we will talk about it more in this presentation further on. But let me talk about a little bit about religion and Marxism, how communists or Marxists look at religion.
And also, before you go there, I just want to say that this topic is relevant to Americans in general because China has been, not just China has been challenging the American, you know, the sole American status as a sole superpower, but it is also challenging to many extents the underlying fundamental principles of freedom that America was based upon, and they are successful to some extent in working on the fault lines within the American society in creating more fissures, and that is done through so I can remember so the 20, 30, even 10 years ago, uh, to be considered a socialist in America was a stigma, right? I mean, nobody wanted to be called himself or herself a socialist, much less a communist. And today, if you go and talk to youth in America, they're enamored by this socialism. And I would say, so I would pause it to say that a lot has to do with the way China has used its money in doing the propaganda in America through various media channels, because this is an open society. And China has taken advantage of open society throughout the world and and propagated its own ideology and its own way of making sure that it finds a voice in that society and breaks the society that it is trying to make impact on. Another arm of Chinese Communist Party is Confucius Society. Confucius societies exist in a lot of campuses, and through that also China exerts its influence and promotes the socialist or the communist cause. It is so that I just came across last night a survey, of these Project Veritas kind of projects go out and do these surveys, and they survey the college students. So in the Washington D.C. area, they conducted a survey and they asked the students if they're proud of America as a country, and that's very relevant because today is the Independence Day. So they asked these college students if they're proud to be American, and the majority of these students said they're not proud to be American. Okay, but when they were asked, though, this is where China still has to do more work. when they asked what country comes closest to the ideal country that they would think of, and they couldn't name one. So all democracies are work in progress, all societies are work in progress, all cultures are work in progress towards perfection. Nobody is perfect, but if you take the youth of the country and you make them feel guilty about their own country, that country's prognosis, a long-term success, is is question, right? And that is why, Utsada, what you are going to now present, which is tracing the history of, you already started that, tracing the history of Communist Party, and talking about the communists, talking about the religion in general. So these are all the things that communists do in order to de-link yourself from your culture, from your country, so they can then run a dictatorial government for the few, by the few. Okay?
So,
So
so,
that
so I just
go
wanted
ahead.
to say something. The biggest thing that happens with communism, Marxism, however we want to put it, leftism, the biggest problem that happens with them is that their actions and what they do are always filled with irony. For example, since you brought up Confucius Institute, you know, Marxists in China, communists in China destroyed religion. They destroyed religion everywhere. And they destroyed religion, and go ahead 70 years. Now they are creating institutes in the name of a religion because they know that it doesn't work. They become a religion in themselves and they fail, and therefore they have to bring back religion. So it's not very different in other parts of the world where they have managed to survive either. They bring back religion all the time. So if you really look at ideas, I think there is nothing that has failed so fast and so comprehensively than Marxism and communism in terms of the ideas it presented. I'll tell you why. So if you look at how Marx looked at religion, Marx says religion dulls the pain caused by oppression. Fair enough. It does nothing to solve the problem. It is a bad attempt to make life more bearable. Fair enough. Salvation from bondage and misery is promised by afterlife. Notice this. This part is important because in the entire thesis about religion that communists present, they are only talking about two religions in the world, and that is Christianity and Islam. Marx had absolutely zero idea of what the ancient religions and ancient civilizational entities of China and India were. And therefore, when China first and in India came under the influence of Marxism, the thing that survived, that suffered the most, was their own civilizations, because those who followed Marxism or communism in China and India had very little. They were so blinded by the ideology itself that they had so little understanding of the fact that all Marx talks about is Christianity and Islam. And these fools, if I cannot use a more harsher word on this show, these fools were destroying their own civilizations, which I will show how later on, by actually following a person who had no idea what these civilizations stood for. So Marx's analysis of China and the Dharmic civilization, this is how he puts it, is he considered Chinese and Indians semi-barbarian countries who will soon reach a class structure prevalent in Europe. So he considered his entire thesis is based on Europe. And all these Chinese and Indian Marxists who follow Marxism and communism so blindly actually are importing a solution or a medicine that is not even relevant to their society and the disease that is prevalent in Europe. So they are basically taking a medicine for a disease that somebody else had in Europe. And that is the whole irony of the situation, because it destroyed China and it destroyed India as well to some extent, as I will show later on. Because, China had to abandon these core Marxist ideologies to start succeeding. First, it went to capitalism. Then it went to religion. China is promoting now Buddhism. It's promoting Confucianism. So there is no Marxism in China except for dictatorship that comes from that tradition. But I also now want to go towards India a little bit and show how, because we are talking about 100 years of communism in China, how it impacted Hindus. And since 80% of the Hindus, 90% of the Hindus live in India, let's now go to see how Chinese communism impacted Hindus around the world. And Indians and Hindus primarily, very few Muslims, but mostly Hindus, were heavily influenced by Marxism. In fact, some of the earliest leaders of Marxism globally, at the level of Lenin and Trotsky, were Indians. In fact, if you go to Mexico, you will see that there are monuments to many of these communist leaders who were from India. Uh, but the real communist influence of China in India was visible, and in 1962, when India actually fought a war with China. And in that war, the Indian communists actually, many of them, actually most of them, supported China. And that, imagine this: your country is fighting a war with another country that is occupying your territory, occupying your land, killing your people, as well as killing people of Tibet, who were, really the victims of the 1962 conflict. Uh, in all of that, your own political leaders from the Communist Party, instead of supporting and standing by your people, are actually supporting the enemy.
Well, but that is because there are a couple of ideologies, maybe more, but at least two ideologies that are transnational, and they don't believe in the boundaries of geographical boundaries of the country. They believe in the boundaries of their ideologies.
Ajay bhai, I thought you were going to say that this was an
That, well,
Islam.
I just wanted to kind of point out that communists don't believe in the geographical boundaries unless they believe in it. So China, for example, Utsoda, as we all know, follows communism. They're transnational, or Indian communists are fools, and they would think that they are this universalist, and they want to be with their brethren or their sisters in China, and they believe in this one global government. On the other hand, China goes around capturing land which belongs to Tibet, which belongs to India, which belongs to Vietnam, which belongs to some other Japan, which belongs to Philippines, which belong to all any other country that you Philippines, you name it, right? So this is the difference between the fools who are Indian communists and people in China who call themselves communist and rule China.
Correct.
And they don't believe in the same universalism. They want to sign people up for roads and borders initiative under the guise of one world. Uh, but on the other hand, they're going around capturing other people's territories, and not in a peaceful way.
Correct. So Ajay bhai, if you see, if you go to the next slide, since you're sharing slides, uh, you will see that you will see the quote from Harkishan Singh Surjit, who was the leader of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, in
For
1960.
many decades.
Yeah, I mean, he was the leader until his time of death. I mean, he died in the late early 2000s. So
Yep.
for 40-50 years, this man was the leader of communism in India, Marxists in India, at least the part which was the non-violent part. Imagine what the violent part was. So the non-violent stream of communism that took part in elections in India, and I can have a whole show on that, how the communists split in three different groups. This guy, Communist Party of India, has been on record in 1962, after 1962, saying we have called for peaceful settlements of the disputes between the two countries. He means India and China. Chairman Mao is our friend, not Nehru. So you can see that this guy is sitting in India, most likely in Delhi, and he's calling the leader of China, the dictator of China, who is invading India, as his own leader. And this guy goes on to blame the communists who are not in agreement with him. There were a few communists who split away, saying CPI, on the other hand, that's Communist Party of India, was
Is this the slide,
supporting
Utsoda, that you wanted to show? Am I
the
on the
one
right
after
slide?
that. The one after
One
that.
after that. I'm sorry.
You can stay on this slide too. I will explain with the
Okay,
corn
let
and
me
the
go to the
sickle.
next one and then come back here, or
No, just stay here. That's fine. The
okay,
corn and
okay.
the sickle one was the one the communists who split and said, okay, the least we should do is support India in a war, which is destroying the country. And the one on the right, which is the CPIM, Communist Party of India, Marxist, that's the one that went on and supported China when it attacked India and when it was killing Indians by the thousands and Tibetans as well.
That is still the largest communist party in India, right? The
That
CPIM.
is the CPIM is the most relevant communist party. The CPI is pretty much gone and dusted.
Yep.
It existed for a small period of time, but it's mostly done and dusted. It's the CPIM which is the most relevant and has the most voice as communism in the democratic aspect of India. There is another communism in India which is even worse, and that is the Communist Party of India Maoist and the Communist Party of India Marxist Leninist. These two communist groups are even worse, and because they not only did not believe in democracy, because the ones we are showing you, the sickle, hammer and sickle with the star, as well as the corn and the sickle, these two at least believed in non-violence as their daily
Well, also I want to interrupt you and say CPM says they are non-violent, but actually the history of CPM across India, especially in Kerala, especially in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, um, and to some extent even Bengal, West Bengal, shows that they're anything but peaceful.
No, no, I
That
correct myself. I
countless,
wouldn't say use the word non-violent. I would say democratic. They believed in
yeah,
participating in elections. They did have
well,
violent acts. You are absolutely
as
right.
long as it's in their favor. Um, I would also I would say that the number of RSS, which is Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh Swayamsevaks, and ABVP Karyakartas who have been killed by the Communist Party of India Marxist and of course the Naxalites is over a couple of hundred. And there are books that have been published depicting the biography of all the people who have been killed by these communists for nothing other than belonging to a Hindu organization that was fighting either college elections or fighting the local city council election or something or the other. These are violent people who are driven by a murderous ideology.
Correct. Absolutely. I agree with you completely. And you know, I think these are the as you mentioned, these are the communists that were the better ones. I mean, that doesn't mean anything about how much violence they committed and how much aggressive they were. They were aggressive in Bengal. They killed thousands of people in Bengal as well when they were in power for 34 years. But they were still willing to participate in elections in India, and that's why I'm saying that they were the more, again, underlining the part, relatively democratic ones. Now we go to the part, the communists who believed themselves to be the real communists, which is the Communist Party of India Maoist. These communists didn't even believe in elections or participating in a democracy, because if you remember, in the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned a quote from Mao, Chairman Mao of China, where he says, revolution has to be violent. And the violence, it starts with military violence, but then it's economic, social, goes down to the individual, if you remember the quote I started off with. So the Communist Party of India Maoist, with the name
This is the
Maoist in
one.
it, actually with later on they're given different names, and I will explain why. They're called Naxalites, they're just called Maoists, so different names for them. They actually did not believe in even participating in elections. They believed in pure and unadulterated violence to capture power. And just in the last 20 years, I will, if you let me share the screen, Ajabai, I will share something here.
Yeah, please go ahead. Let me. I'll stop the share. Please go ahead and share the screen. You have the ability to share.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sharing the screen and I'm showing you a data sheet. And in this data sheet, you will see that since 2000, year 2000, more than 10,000 people have been killed. More than 10,000, 10,853, and that is until until March 2021, have been killed just in the past 20 years in this violence. So imagine an organization that believes in violence, that kills people whenever it gets a chance. It has killed, out of those 10,000 people killed, more than nearly 4,000 have been civilians. Imagine that. And another couple of hundreds non-specified. So these are civilians. These are poor people. These are people who are under poverty line, under the poverty line. These people who have children to feed, who are struggling in their everyday lives. These are people getting killed. Half of these people who the Maoists kill are poor people. And these Maoists claim that they represent the poor people and they're fighting for the poor people. So this is the tragedy of Chinese exported communism in India, that you have thousands of people dying in the last 2 decades directly from communism that came from China. And the impact of that has been tremendously tragic for people in India, especially the poor people in India.
And then it is morphed in many different ways, because there are, they have built allies across now ideological spectrum to the religious spectrum. They've built
Yeah,
allies. They've now enrolled people in urban areas, and I think you're going to cover all of that because
yeah, I'm going to get to that. So I just wanted to give you the magnitude of the violence that Maoists in India, communism that follows the Chinese tradition of communism, have been and have wreaked upon India in the
and
past.
then China provides arms to a lot of these groups that are violent. China has directly provided, from all the news reports I've seen, people in northeastern India, for example, who have taken up, some of the groups that have taken up armed struggle, they have received arms and ammunition from China. So this is not a benign ideological warfare. This is an actual armed insurgency in some places, driven by the communist ideology in China.
Not
Um,
just that,
and
Ajay bhai. They directly participated in promoting them. And that's why I'm going to
right,
this. This violent Maoist communism that exists in India, that started early as 1960s. When they first started their violent campaign, it was what was called a revolutionary uprising in a small town called Naxalbari in Bengal. And in
right,
there, when they killed hundreds of people in that violence, and they tried to took over the entire city. In that, the radio Peking is the earlier name for the Chinese capital of Beijing, what is Beijing today. This is June 28, 1967. Radio Peking actually broadcast
so
that.
that you have some really good slides. Do you want to? What I know your pictures and all that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to kind of go show you which slide are we talking about now. Is this the slide?
And slide number 15 in the presentation. But Ajay bhai, we don't need to look into the slides. If it, I'll just ask you to show the slide when we come to that. I think there is couple
Okay,
of slides with maps on it. So I will get there, and a couple of slides with individual names and pictures on it.
okay, fair
This
enough.
part,
So
I just want to mention that
sure,
on June 20th, 1967, Radio Peking, which is Radio Beijing, in those days, radio was the big, propaganda tool, not like, your TV channels nowadays or podcasts. Those days, radio was it, and people used to listen to radio. It had a lot of impact on people's minds. Radio Peking said, "This is the front paw of the revolutionary armed struggle launched by the Indian people under the guidance of Mao Zedong's teaching." So this is the official radio broadcast from China when Maoists in India in 1967, June 20th, were actually killing people and taking over cities. That is the direct influence that they are exerting here. So you can see that, people want to see how China has impacted, communists and terrorists in India. This is where it begins in 1967. And not only that, all these Indian communist leaders were enamored. We just heard Harkishan Singh Sunjit, who was the part of the democratic aspects of communism, who were participating in elections. He says his chairman is Mao. He doesn't care about who the prime minister of India is at that time. Doesn't matter if the prime minister is good, bad, incompetent, competent, but he was the country's prime minister. But communists were always looking up to Mao for their ideology and their support at the cost of their own country then in which they lived. So this is where this shows the the degree and the amount of influence that Chinese communists exerted on Indian communists. And they continue to do so even today. And, one of the reasons why the Naxalbari uprising in Bengal failed in 1967, even though it triggered a movement that continues to kill, as I showed you, 10,000, 11,000 people in the last 20 years. The reason it failed is because, irony enough, the people who participated in the uprising were not the poor people. It was the relatively middle class and upper middle class and rich peasantry. So basically, it was a fake, poor people's movement. It was the educated middle class that participated in it, and they did not have any military training. They were all, listening to radio broadcasts and thinking of themselves as revolutionaries, and therefore they failed. So that explains why. But if you look back in time, I think the Naxalbari movement didn't actually fail. It caused India to bleed, and it continues to bleed India even today. And you have these people in universities, in multinational companies, and that is another level of irony in the whole story here. So now I will go into a time which is current, and connect some of the leaders of this movement that I just showed you, directly influenced by it. So basically, I'm now fast forwarding from the 1960s and 70s, because otherwise I'll take up the whole show just talking about the history. So I'm going to fast forward it to today's time, and to who are the leaders of these movements today. Okay, and I'll show you a couple of pictures. So Ajaba, if you go to slide number, I think there's a photograph of Maoists in military uniform. Slide number 17. I don't know what slide number it shows up on your
Let's look at it. So this is the slide on. Let me just show you, and you can
it
just
shows
tell
a
me
bunch
which.
of a Maoists walking with weapons, and walking through the forest with weapons. So you can.
Actually, Utsada, you feel free to share the slides at your end.
Okay,
Same thing.
I'll do that then.
Yeah, but
Yeah, yeah.
this is the
I
one I
let me do
have.
that.
Yeah, why don't you drive the slides today?
That's fine. Perfect.
Okay.
So this slide that you see here is basically what Maoists are doing today. They live in rural areas. The armed segment of the Maoists are the rural poor people, and they are the people who are brainwashed with this, as this I call it a pernicious, poisonous ideology, and they are the ones who are actually shedding their blood, dying for a cause that they are made to believe is going to bring them change. But the people in front of this ideology are not poor people, and they don't participate in the violence. They promote the violence, and they have global connections. So I'm going to go, and I call them the
They're the
over.
ones who create the people who create the toolkits sitting
Correct.
on their computers, and then the people who are dying for that for promoting the toolkit ideology.
Exactly. So these people who you see carrying these automatic weapons in the forests and fighting are fighting other poor people who are in the security forces and who are part of village defense forces. So it's
Right.
basically poor people fighting poor people, and both sides poor people are dying. And who are the ones who are promoting that? These are the ones who are promoting that. They believe in a global revolution of Mao. And this then gentleman is named Kobal Gandhi. He's a highly educated scholar, has traveled the world. He's now in jail, but these are the ideologues behind it. You have Meda Patkar, you have Sandeep Pandey, and I'm going to stay on this picture. Because
Yeah.
just
Tell us about a little bit about all the people you just flashed on your screen. So, for people who are not as familiar as you are, for example, what is Kobat Gandhi or Kamal's claim to fame? Why is he important? Why is
because
he important to mention even in Hindu Lounge?
correct. So the reason these people are important is because these people travel amongst you and us. They live in urban areas in Delhi, in Mumbai. They interact with the politicians. They go to campuses. They teach in campuses. They work in multinational corporations, and they fly around the world with a passport, and they are part of the mainstream society. But these are the people that are giving the ideological support. the socio-political justification, the voice, and the narrative and the money to the people who are killing 10,000 people in the past 20
So
years.
what has Kamal done, for example, Kamal, what has he done, for example, that should be worrying to Hindus in general? Why is he a bad guy?
So this gentleman, for example, he works under the
Vishal is
garb of
gentle
committee.
and he's gentle, or he's a violent man,
So see the thing, he's not a violent man himself. His
or
parents
was?
were a senior finance executive. He started this group called Committee for the Protection of Democratic Rights in India. If you just listen to the name of the organization, you'll be thinking, oh my God, this guy is sold into democracy. Committee for the Protection of Democratic Rights in India. This guy, who is a member of the Communist Party of India Maoist, and as we just discussed in the last half an hour, who don't believe in democracy, whose goal is to follow Mao and his strategy of violent armed struggle to destroy democracies, starts an organization named Committee for the Protection of Democratic Rights. So you see the irony here, and this will keep repeating itself and this gentleman is now in jail for starting a conspiracy to kill people in India, hundreds of people actually in rural Chhattisgarh. But he's an overground worker. He himself doesn't kill people, but he gets money under these organizations that sound very good, and he's facing incarceration because he was caught. And he has an army of lawyers, by the way, in Delhi and from around the world, who will be signing petitions from London, from American universities to get him released. So anyway, that's this guy, Gopal Gandhi. Uh, so if I go back to the other, go back to the presentation and go to the next slide, Medha Patkar. I think I'm not going to spend
Now
much.
she prevented millions of people from getting drinking water in Gujarat by running the Narmada Bachao Andolan. And even though the government was resettling 50, 60,000 people, she was, because she wanted to just, basically, communism thrives in chaos. And in order to create chaos
Chaos and misery.
and misery, she was preventing millions of people, literally millions of people, in getting drinking water because she would not allow Narmada, the dam to be built on Narmada River, and water would just flow into the ocean, and the millions of people would suffer drought year after year. Okay? That is her claim to fame. All right, let's talk about Sandeep Pandey.
So if you look at Sandeep Pandey, and I think, can you see my screen still, Ajay bhai?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. Hold on. Yeah. So the next slide is Sandeep Pandey, and the reason I put Sandeep Pandey in there, because Sandeep Pandey is a member of Communist Party of Politburo of Communist Party of India Marxist Leninist, which is also a Maoist group. So as I said in the beginning, there's Communist Party of India Maoist, and there's Communist Party of India Marxist Leninist, which is also a violent faction of the Maoists. He was a member of the Politburo of this organization, but he founded an organization called Asha for Education, which is a non-profit registered in America, and sends hundreds and millions of dollars. In fact, that organization, in the recent COVID relief that was being sent from America to different organizations in India, that organization received a significant sum of money. Not only that, just 2 weeks ago, Sandeep Pandey was part of a briefing it was an online briefing by Indian American Muslim Council and CARE, Council for American Islamic Relations, talking about how India has failed as a democracy. Again, look at the irony of this. Sandeep Pandey, a member of the Politburo for an organization that believes in armed struggle, kills 20,000 people in the last 20 years. It kills 10,000 people in the last 20 years, and who does not believe in democracy by virtue of his ideology, is making a briefing at the Capitol Hill in the last 2 weeks talking about how democracy has failed in India. That's the irony of these overground workers, or that these Maoists represent. So I think we are running out of time, Ajay bhai. So I'm going to just
keep going, Utsada. Keep going. We will go a little bit over, but let's spend some. Let's finish up to a certain point where you have some more people. So let's cover two other people, and then let's see if we can bring all this together. So keep going. You're doing great. You're on mute though, but otherwise you're doing great. Okay.
No, I was going to say that I'm just going to quickly go through two other individuals because they're
Yeah,
very
let's
relevant
go to
today.
two other individuals.
Yeah. So we will have Varavar Rao. This gentleman is a poet. Okay, another very benign,
So,
very creative profession that you would not expect is part of an effort to that has already resulted in the death of 10,000 people in the last 20 years. Poor people, I might remind. This gentleman, Varavar Rao, is a poet who was involved in a conspiracy in 2018, along with this lady, Sudha Bharadwaj. She's born in America in Massachusetts, went to the top schools around the world, okay, lived in Delhi, is a lawyer. These two individuals, Varavar Rao and Sudha Bharadwaj, were involved in a conspiracy in 2018 to kill the Prime Minister of India and incite riots in a place called Bhima Koregaon, which is in the Indian state of Maharashtra, between two poor communities. And that riot resulted in a lot of deaths and loss of millions of dollars of property. So see if you can find comparisons of that in the US somewhere. And if you don't, then wait for a few years because this is where many of the groups in US are also heading towards.
so,
So
so that these are the people who are at the forefront of what we would consider to be urban Naxal movement, right? Because they live in
in fact,
urban
in the
area.
recent past, the term urban Naxal, and again, remember the word Naxal, it starts from the Naxalbari uprising in 1967, which was directly and openly promoted by Mao, Radio China, Radio Peking, calling it a revolution by the Indians who are following the path of Mao. So that's why the term Naxal comes, and that's why these people are called urban Naxals. And this is where people who are watching this presentation, whose family, whose children, they if they hear their kids, their relatives, their friends idolizing these individuals or are in any way enamored by these individuals, it is time for them to share with them, those people, what the background of this movement is and how it is directly.
So that is the point that you just made. I mean, that really brings it home to a lot of Hindus, because I have recently met several Hindus in America whose children have been enamored by socialism and who have been enamored by by some of these leftist people who they have idolized, especially people like Sudha Bhardwaj, who are born and brought up in America, went to, as you mentioned, went to the topmost schools in America, and are now espousing the cause of supposedly the cause of equality and cause of socialism and all of that. And these kids who are born and brought up in America do not have the historic context of what Naxalism is, what urban Naxals are, and how violent this ideology is. And this violence, Utsada, is something that the parents have no clue, and neither do the kids. And they sit and they fantasize about this idealistic society, almost like a Shangri-La, where everything is going to be great, without understanding that this is really a violent ideology that they need to learn more about, and learn more about from the neutral sources. I'm not saying learn from us or learn from someone we are recommending any of that. Look up Naxalwad, look up Naxalbari, look up the urban Naxal, look up these movements, connect the dots, see how what kind of havoc in the lives of ordinary people this kind of movement is causing, and how it is impacting the American Hindu youth. So that we can this one is an important slide. We can probably skip the slide number, the next slide you have, but this slide to me is really important, because this is another way I think American Hindu kids who do not understand the connections between some of these academicians who are teaching in the universities, their friends who are Naxalwadis, and the connection of these Naxalwadis to the Islamist from Kashmir, for example, a Pakistani spy, convicted spy, right? Ghulam Nabi Faith. Tell us about him. And so this brings it the whole circle of a Hindu kid to the leftist academic, a leftist academic to Naxalite, from a Naxalite to uh, a Pakistani convicted Pakistani spy. And why is our youth at danger? That is what we want to highlight. So please go for it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to present this case because this case is an example of how the Maoists, even though they're directly influenced by Chinese ideology in the past through the Chinese state, they got support, killed thousands and thousands of people, produce violence in the poorest communities of India, you know, cause so much damage, have already caused and continue to cause so much damage, both in urban and rural areas, constantly conspiring to destroy big sections of the country of India. These are also the people who are the easiest to recruit for foreign spy agency who have nothing to do with Marxism or communism. So, for example, here is the case of a gentleman called Gautam Navlakha, highly educated, traveled around the world, went to the best universities, is an urban Maoist, the overground workers, not directly participating in violence, but giving the sustenance, the logistics, the resources, and the logic to the rest of the population for that violence. What does he do? He travels to Washington, D.C. year after year in the early 2000s to give and testify against India on Jammu and Kashmir, nothing to do with Marxism, with the support of a Kashmiri Islamist named Ghulam Nabi Fai. Ghulam Nabi Fai belonged to Jamaat-e-Islami in India, came to America, became a Pakistani spy, worked as a Pakistani spy. Gautam Lavlaka took money from him. Imagine where, the whole religion is bullshit, Marxism ideology, money is not important. All those things go out of the window when it comes to these things. And Gautam Navlakha comes year after year to support this gentleman who eventually was convicted in 2011 and spent 2 years in jail in America. When Ghulam Nabi Fai was in jail, after being convicted as a Pakistani spy, Gautam Navlakha is continuing to support him from India, the Maoist Mr. Navlakha, continuing to support him from India and continuing to petition the US government to release Fai. So it's not like he can claim at some point that, I did not know he was a Pakistani spy. I did not know he worked for the ISI. I am a Marxist. I do not believe in religion, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. Even after this guy is in jail, Gautam Navlakha continues to promote him, continues to support him, signs a petition to get him released. And the funniest thing is that he blames India for it, that this guy is in jail. He's an Indian himself, Gautam Navlakha. So that is the irony and the deceit that many of these Maoists who are educated, who are in positions of power, they bring to the society. And the thing that hits us home the closest is that it's not like these people are in the past. These people are working right now more so than ever before. If you see the protests that were organized against the CAA, the CAA rule by the Indian government, the new law that was passed to give
The Constitutional Amendment Act that gave
yeah,
preferential
it
treatment
gave
to refugees,
thousands and thousands of
persecution.
refugees, persecuted refugees, a home to live with. The movement that was run across the world, especially in America, against CAA, where does the support for the poor goes there? That was run with people like Gautam Navlakha, with people like Sudha Bharadwaj, with people like Sandeep Pandey, which I mentioned before. And young kids, Indian American kids, Hindu American kids, born in this country, who are enamored by these they become useful idiots by these vicious, poisonous ideologues. They were protesting against India on the behest of these people. And they still do it now. You will see another new movement come up before the UP elections. Trust me, in the next 6 months, there will be a huge movement produced by these Maoists as UP elections come, because now these Maoists are not only working for the Chinese ideologues, they're also working for Islamists. And that is the even bigger tragedy, because, imagine the history of Maoism.
Well, and look at the irony. I mean, isn't China the same country that has persecuted Uyghur Muslims in the worst possible way? I don't think anyone is persecuting Muslims more than communist China is, and
Correct.
you know, and then people are turning a blind eye to that, right?
Absolutely. And I want to show this map. And that map is what used to be called the Red Corridor. So this map is from 2010. The reason I show this map is because at one point of time, this corridor used to be called the Tirupati to Pashupati corridor. And again, this whole show is so full of ironies. You know, Tirupati being one of the most holiest of Hindu shrines, dedicated to Lord Vishnu, and Pashupati, again one of the holiest of Hindu shrines in Nepal, dedicated to Lord Shiva. And that
Right.
whole belt between Tirupati to Pashupati was taken over in the rural areas by this violent extreme left wing Maoists. This was in 2010. Now this corridor doesn't exist anymore. They have been defeated largely in the rural areas where the actual arm, they still do terrorist attacks. They still just killed a dozen Indian security forces in Chhattisgarh a couple of weeks ago. They still do attacks, but their control on the ground is gone. And what has increased? So the militarily they have been defeated. Mao's revolution has ended militarily in India. Where it has succeeded is creating people like Arundhati Roy, creating people like Gautam Navlakha, creating people like Sudha Bharadwaj, sitting in campuses around the world, destroying people's minds by the dozens. So even though the red corridor doesn't exist anymore, and Tirupati and Pashupati are both back in the hands of the Hindus and the region in between, these ideologues are continuing to create havoc with young minds in campuses around the world, in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Kolkata, creating a whole generation of brainwashed, useful idiots. Um, so I think that's where I would let my
Excellent.
presentation end, and now I will send it to you, this part of the presentation, Ajay Bhai, to carry
All right.
forward on the Hindu good
So
news.
I think we did a any time we look at we look at um, something like this, which really uh, screams for attention from Hindus in America, because there's a very short line between the communist Maoist and the Hindu youth in America. All I want to do is okay. With that, so that I
Ajay, the
think
thing
we
is
have
that as I said, I mean, today I already took up an hour of our pretty much the entire presentation, and we barely scratched the surface. Like I showed you four personalities, all of whom have direct links with America, who are part of the urban Maoist, terrorist, for lack of better word, because these are banned organizations: the Communist Party of India Maoist and Communist Party of India Marxist Leninist. So this is just the tip of the spear, that tip of the iceberg. I can go ahead and make 5-hour presentations on individuals like this who operate in the public space.
and we should. So now let me go to the with that we come to a conclusion of this particular this particular segment, and we move on to one of our regularly scheduled segments. The first one being the Hindu good news of the week. So that I have a splendid Hindu good news of the week. So let me share this news with you. It is from Times of India. It came out this week, and three students from Islamic nations have enrolled in the Sanskrit University in India. Now, one of them is a Hindu, but the other two are actually non-Hindu students who have now enrolled in the Sanskrit University in Gujarat. Remember, Sanskrit at one time was the Vishwa Bhasha. Sanskrit is the mother of many languages in the world, and for for centuries, Sanskrit was neglected, and it's only in past few decades that there is a revival going on uh, in India and elsewhere, where Sanskrit is being taught. There's a village in Karnataka where Sanskrit is being spoken, and Sanskrit Bharati deserves a lot of credit for doing that. And we can, we should actually invite someone from Sanskrit Bharati one of these days and do a show on Sanskrit. But today, for the good news of the week, the Hindu good news of the week, the mother of many languages around the world, Sanskrit, is now finding students voluntarily enrolling in Sanskrit universities in India, wanting to learn Sanskrit so that they can understand their own culture better. One of the students, Sada, is from Iran. One of them is from Afghanistan. Remember, both these places used to be Hindu at one time. So this is these are the students who have quest to understand for understanding their own past, their own history, and that is why they're coming to Bharat, to India, and to learn Sanskrit.
So I just wanted
So
to say
that
something, Ajay here.
yes,
Before just to step back and look in the past a little bit of both the Iranian population as well as the Afghan population. As you rightly said, Afghanistan was a Hindu region for the most parts of history, and Iran, even though they were not Hindu as we look at describe Hindu dharma today, but they were proto-Vedic, absolutely proto-Vedic in their history. So both these communities, their languages, the early Persian language was very much Sanskrit. It was almost 80% Sanskrit. Probably it was more Sanskrit than any of modern Indian languages are, regional languages are. So the early Persian was very much Sanskrit. Even the post-Arab invasion and post-conversion to Islam Persian language retains a large part of Sanskrit vocabulary. And similarly, the Pashto language in Afghanistan. So Pashto, Dari, and these languages have a strong influence of Sanskrit in them. In fact, despite being converted to Islam for almost 1,000 years, even though they have lost their culture, they have lost their history, pretty much everything, the language still maintains some good relationship with Sanskrit, and that has not been the language is not. Urdu is far more Arabized than Pashto and Persian today.
so that this requires a some music, right? Because it's such a good news. Let's celebrate this good news with some cheer. Three from Islamic nation enroll in Sanskrit University in Gujarat, and that is the Hindu good news of the week. So moving on to the next one, the Hindu Seva Act or the Charity of the Week. We're still not fully recovered from COVID in India. There's still about this yesterday, there were 44,000 additional cases. The number of people dying of COVID has come down significantly, but there's a lot of recuperation that the society has to go through. And BHP America is still continuing to work on rehabilitation efforts across India. And we urge you to go to vhpamerica.org, click on the donate button, and donate to the COVID-19 efforts in India. It is now mostly at the recovery and recovery phrase. And as a reminder, this is the reason why we do the Seva Act of the Week. So that we do this because it makes us feel good to do lokahitam, or we do it to do good for other people. Okay, and so please go to vhpamerica.org, click on the donate button, and donate to our COVID relief efforts. And with that, Utsada, the final segment of the week. Who do we have as the Hindu phobe of the week? A big reveal. Go for it.
Ajiba, you want me to reveal it? Well,
So go for it. This is something that is. I mean, we can do a whole show on this. Really a whole show on this. And I want you to talk about it, and then I'll fill in some of my thoughts. But please go for it. New
so
York Times, the
my
Hindu phobe of the week or the Hindu hater of the week. Why is that? Why do we have New York Times as Hindu phobe of the week?
My daughter has a lot to say about
I can see that.
it. Well, New York Times came up with the ad for an employee in India, and in that ad they describe, imagine this: you're trying to hire somebody for writing purposes, and in that ad itself you target the prime minister of that country uh, as a nationalistic, right wing person, and who is against interfaith, multicultural values of India's founders. So, that's the if that is the criteria for your hiring somebody, then you imagine what you have in mind and the viciousness that you have in mind towards that country and its people, who have actually overwhelmingly elected that leader of the country in two democratic elections. So New York Times gets the Hindu hater of the week because its ad asking for an employee by mentioning in the ad that they hate the prime minister of that country.
So that there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it, right? If you really analyze this particular advertisement, you'll see that they talk about India being a melting pot. Now, melting pot implies that people have come to India from various different countries. And just like in America, they have come from multiple countries. Now, that itself is not something that that applies to India. It is taking an American view and imposing on India. The in At this time, the Aryan invasion theory has been completely discredited. So there's no invasion, there's no mass migration like the one that New York Times is referring to. India, as it is, has existed for thousands of years. In fact, India was much bigger country than it is today, geographically, and it has always existed with the same people speaking multiple languages, most of them originating from Sanskrit, some Tamil. Tamil has its own origin, but these are the languages and people that have coexisted with a common thread of Hindu dharma running through across the length and breadth of India. It is not a melting pot of people and languages. Okay, now,
Well, the
um,
worldview that New York Times possesses is not that
so
worldview.
in a job description,
Yeah.
Utsada, in a job description,
No, the
it
New
is
York
an
Times looks at
editorialized
India as
version.
Ajay bhai, New York Times, you have to understand. New York Times doesn't look at India as a civilization. New York Times looks at India as a British colony, which was given freedom by the British and educated by the British, and is a remnant of a colonial era, which is currently ruled by a prime minister who promotes Hinduism. That is literally the New York Times vision of India, and they are consistent with that vision. And that, to us, that's hatred for Hindus. But New York Times actually doesn't see India as a civilization. In fact, New York Times doesn't even. I can assure you, people in New York Times don't even consider Hindus as as a people.
Civilized people.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll make a point. I do have a point on that. So hold that thought. So that go forward a little bit forward. It says yet hundreds of millions of people are struggling for a better life for their children. Everywhere in the world, people struggle for better life for their children. But remember one thing, Utsada. When I was growing up, as a long time ago, but when I was growing up, 70% people from 70% of Indians were living, or maybe more, 80% of Indians, I think, when I was growing up in the 60s, were below the poverty line as defined by international agencies. Today, Utsoda, the number of people who are below the poverty line are about 20 to 25% as defined by the international agencies. So there are multiple ways to look at this. New York Times could have said that India has succeeded in pulling a lot of people from poverty to middle class. Instead of that, in a job advertisement, not even writing an editorial, New York Times would point to hundreds of millions of people who are struggling for better life. Everyone struggles for better life for their children. Even in the most prosperous democracy in the world, or even in the most authoritarian state in the world, China, people want something better for their children compared to what they had for themselves. that struggle always continues. But to look at the negative from in every aspect, to put us to impose a history that didn't exist, to give the economic view that is untrue, and then they go on and say Mr. Modi is advocating a self-sufficient muscular. What is muscular nationalism? Is standing up to communist China muscular nationalism? Is standing up to violent religious ideology and defending your border against daily terrorist attacks or the incursions that happen on your borders, is that muscular nationalism or is that self-defense? What is this? Where do they get this narrative from, that because that this self-defense is muscular nationalism, is standing up to force to give refuge to people who are forcefully converted in the neighboring countries? Is that muscular nationalism? Is calling for equality among all people who belong to different caste and creed? Is that muscular nationalism? Is preserving the culture against a conversion by force and fraud? Is that muscular nationalism? What is muscular nationalism? And why would that be at odds with interfaith, multicultural goals of modern India founders? Who have they even read the Constitution of India? The front page of it, the cover page of it, the title page of it has the picture of Sri Ram. In India is a country that was founded on the premise that someday, and Mahatma Gandhi said this, that we want to work towards Rama Rajya. Okay? That is the foundation of modern India or ancient India. It's always been a country, a nation, a state that aspires to be Ram Rajya. Okay, it is not at faith, and no Hindu dharma, no Hindu-based system of rule can be at odds with interfaith, multicultural goal of modern India. First of all, it is one culture. It's the Indian culture, Hindu culture. There may be different religious practices. This is not a place where people migrated from 100 countries who were trying to preserve their culture in some way or the other. Again, equal
Well,
respect to
Ajay
people
bhai, New
from
York
different
Times,
culture,
as I
but
said, New York Times looks at it in a different way. New York Times doesn't consider India as a civilization. So they are looking at India as a former British colony, and they are appealing to people who will address India in that way. Their job description is very perfect for what they are looking for.
but look
They
at
are
this.
actually
So
looking for somebody
what
who
is
hates
online
India.
speech? Here is Twitter that is thumbing its nose at Indian laws. There's Twitter who is blatantly trampling on the sovereignty of India, and New York Times is saying that there's a growing effort to police online speech. What online speech? The Twitter head of India cannot even say if he's an employee of Twitter India or Twitter in Singapore or Twitter in US. This is how an Indian government still does not do anything to Twitter. What is the curb? Where is the online speech, or where is the online company like Twitter? Where is it being? Where are their rights being trampled here?
You have to understand, New York Times is not looking for somebody who cares about India. So the job
No,
description
who cares
is
about
apt for
neutral
that.
journalism, right? Forget about India. Do they care about journalism?
When was the last time they did?
That's a good point. I'll have to go look it up.
Exactly. So
So
that's why it is important to understand that you are assuming New York Times to be a media outlet with with journalistic ethos. New York Times, especially the one that put out this ad in India, is a foreign funded non-government organization. It is behaving like one. It should be described as one. As Kanchan Gupta, who is the advisor to the government of India, said, New York Times is doing all the things right. It's just not doing it right as a journalistic organization. It's doing it as a non-governmental, partisan, non-governmental organization. It's a foreign funded, from the Indian perspective. We are in America, so we are in this country of New York Times. uh, it's a non-government organization with an agenda, and that's how he's behaving. It should be described as one. It should not be described as a journalistic organization.
Look at this, Utsada. This came from New York Times a little while ago when the Chandrayaan spacecraft failed. And I didn't want to put this because I didn't want to crowd the other issue, but New York Times has always been um, against India and Hindus. This is a blatantly racist cartoon. You can see this is when the Chandrayaan, sorry, this is when the Mars mission, where India put up a satellite orbiter, sorry, not satellite, when India put up an orbiter, Mangalayan, to the orbit Mars, and it signaled the entry of India into the elite space club because only 3 or 4 countries had ever done it, right? And look, instead of complimenting the scientific achievements of India, New York Times chose to perpetuate the anti-Hindu ideology by showing an impoverished farmer with a cow trying to enter their elitist space club. If this is not racist, so that eventually they had to go and apologize. But the fact that it actually made it to New York Times, I mean, indicates that this paper is blatantly anti-Hindu, anti-India, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
I agree with you.
Okay. So with that, we come to the end of another episode of Hindu Lounge, episode number 60. We have been at it for now 60 weeks. And every week we have uh, we have interesting topics. We come live at 11 o'clock every Sunday Eastern on all our social media channels. We are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and after some delay we are also available on Tag TV. So with that, I will bring this to the close for today. Happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day to America. And Utsada, uh, thank you again for doing this week in and week out. It is always a pleasure. I always learn a lot from you. So thank you. I'm Ajay Shah. I'm the president of the World Council of America. And with me, as always, is Utsav Chakrabarti, executive director of Hindu Pact. Utsav, thank you again. And namaste. Go ahead.
Thank you. Namaste, Ajay Bhai. And it's likewise, the feeling is mutual. I learned a lot from you. And, happy 4th of July to America. And I wish everybody a good holiday. Stay safe. Drive safe.
And Utsav, yep, thank you. Utsav, I just forgot to mention that, as always, we will end the show with a special music that was composed just for this version of Hindu Lounge by Decibels. And amazing piece of music, again, composed just for this episode of Hindu Lounge. I've been telling Decibels to now, they have done over 20 of these. So they should now come up with an album because their music is getting rave reviews. So as we end the show, we will run the entire piece of the music that was created by Decibel just for this episode of Hindu Lounge, number 60. With that, thank you. Namaste. Please do stay tuned to listen to the music by Decibel. So thank you again, and namaste. And
Namaste,
we'll
everybody.
turn the video off, but leave the streaming on so that everyone who can listen to this wonderful piece of music.